At dawn on the 22nd of June, 1941, the eastern horizon of Europe was set ablaze by a storm of fire and steel. The quiet fields of Belarus, the rolling plains of Ukraine, and the deep forests of the Baltic states became the stage for the largest military invasion in human history. Operation Barbarossa, Adolf Hitler's gamble to crush the Soviet Union in one swift strike. 3 million German soldiers, organized into 150 divisions, supported by nearly 3,500 tanks, 7,000 artillery pieces, and close to 3,000 aircraft, surged across a front that stretched more than 1,800 miles. It was an offensive of unimaginable scale, dwarfing anything the world had seen before. The Wehrmacht advanced in 3 massive spearheads: Army Group North driving towards Leningrad, Army Group Center aiming for Moscow, and Army Group South sweeping into the rich lands of Ukraine. Behind this strategy lay Hitler's vision, a brutal war of annihilation, one meant not only to seize land, but to eradicate Bolshevism and secure what he called Lebensraum, living space, for the German Reich. The surprise was devastating. In the early hours, the Luftwaffe bombarded Soviet airfields, destroying more than 1,200 aircraft on the ground in a single day. Soviet frontier units, caught unprepared, were encircled in vast pockets. In the first weeks alone, entire Soviet armies ceased to exist. By July, German forces had captured Minsk, taking over 300,000 Soviet prisoners. The road to Smolensk soon followed, where another 180,000 Red Army troops were cut off and destroyed. The Germans advanced with a sense of invincibility, their Blitzkrieg tactics repeating the success seen in Poland and France. Yet this was a war fought not only on the battlefield, but against the very landscape itself. The distances were colossal, the roads primitive, and supply lines strained to breaking. While soldiers marched eastward, trucks and horses lagged behind, and railways, built on different Soviet gauges, had to be painstakingly converted before they could serve the invaders. For the Soviet Union, the opening weeks were catastrophic. Stalin, stunned by the betrayal of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, retreated into silence for days. Soviet command structure faltered, and Red Army soldiers were ordered to stand their ground to the last man, often without proper weapons or ammunition. Still, the tide of German victories could not hide the grim determination of the Soviet people. Industry in the western USSR was dismantled and transported eastward beyond the reach of German guns. Factories in the Urals, Siberia, and Central Asia roared to life, replacing lost equipment with staggering speed. The human cost was already immense. By the autumn of 1941, the Germans had taken more than 3 million Soviet prisoners of war, most of whom would perish in brutal camps. Civilians faced massacres, starvation, and deportations as Nazi ideology drove not merely conquest, but extermination. Towns like Kiev, Kharkov, and Smolensk fell under the shadow of occupation, and Einsatzgruppen followed in the wake of the Wehrmacht, carrying out mass executions, particularly of Jews and political commissars. Yet Operation Barbarossa, designed to be a lightning war, began to falter as the Russian summer gave way to autumn rains. The fertile soil of Ukraine and Russia turned into seas of mud, bogging down tanks and trucks alike. Horses strained and soldiers slogged through waist-deep muck as supply lines became longer and thinner. Still, Hitler pushed his armies forward, convinced that the Soviet state would collapse with one final blow. In October, the assault on Moscow, Operation Typhoon, was launched. Once again, hundreds of thousands of Soviet troops were encircled at Vyazma and Bryansk, yet the capital stood defiant. Stalin refused to abandon Moscow, declaring that the city would be defended at all costs. As German panzers closed in within sight of the Kremlin spires, the Russian winter descended earlier and harsher than expected. Temperatures plummeted to -30 degrees Celsius. German soldiers, dressed for a summer campaign, froze in their thin uniforms. Engines seized, lubricants congealed, and weapons jammed in the bitter cold. In December 1941, with reinforcements drawn from Siberia, fresh troops hardened by the freezing taiga, the Red Army launched a counteroffensive. Moscow was saved. For the first time, the Wehrmacht had been halted. Operation Barbarossa, conceived as a swift and decisive campaign, had become a war of attrition, a war Germany was ill-prepared to fight. By the end of 1941, Hitler's gamble had failed to deliver its promised victory. Instead, the invasion had unleashed a conflict of unprecedented scale and brutality. More than 4 million men were already dead, wounded, or captured. The Eastern Front, stretching thousands of miles, would consume millions more in the years to come. Operation Barbarossa was not merely a campaign of war. It was a turning point in history. It marked the beginning of the titanic struggle that would decide the fate of Europe. The clash of Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union was a collision of ideologies, empires, and human endurance. And though it began with fire and conquest, it ended in the slow, grinding destruction of the invader who had dared to awaken the bear of the East.